Have you ever stopped and wondered, what if the way you're seeing your life is the very thing that's making you suffer? Think about that for a moment. What if the stress you're carrying, the disappointments you can't let go of, the constant feeling that something is missing, isn't coming from your circumstances at all? What if it's coming from the lens through which you're looking at them? Most people spend their entire lives trying to control everything around them. They chase success. They chase approval. They chase certainty. And yet the harder they chase, the more exhausted they become, because life was never designed to obey our plans. Life changes. People leave. Dreams evolve. Unexpected challenges appear without warning. And the moment we start believing that happiness can only exist when everything goes our way, we begin fighting a battle we can never win. But today, you're about to discover a different way of looking at life, a perspective so simple, yet so profound, that it has helped millions of people find peace in the middle of chaos, strength in the middle of uncertainty, and meaning in the middle of life's greatest struggles. This isn't about positive thinking. It's not about pretending problems don't exist. It's about learning a truth that can completely transform the way you experience every moment of your life. A truth that can free you from unnecessary suffering. A truth that can help you stop resisting life and start living it. Because sometimes the biggest breakthrough doesn't happen when your life changes. It happens when the way you see your life changes. And the advice you're about to hear from Jack Kornfield may do exactly that. So listen carefully, because by the end of this message, you may never look at your life the same way again. There is something most people never understand about deeply caring people. They assume that because someone is kind, patient, forgiving, and always willing to help, that kindness will never run out. They mistake consistency for permanence. They mistake compassion for weakness. And over time, they begin treating a gift like an obligation. They stop seeing the effort behind the support. They stop noticing the sacrifices. They stop appreciating the emotional energy that is constantly being given. What they fail to realize is that the people who give the most are often carrying the heaviest burdens in silence. An empath is not someone who helps because they want applause. They are not kind because they're trying to earn approval. They care because caring is part of who they are. When someone they love is struggling, they feel it. When someone is hurting, they naturally want to ease that pain. They show up. They listen. They encourage. They understand, even when they're exhausted, even when they have their own battles to fight, even when nobody asks how they're doing. They continue giving because they genuinely want others to be okay. But here's where many people make a critical mistake. The moment kindness becomes predictable, people stop treating it like a gift. What once inspired gratitude becomes something they simply expect. The phone calls become expected. The emotional support becomes expected. The understanding becomes expected. The patience becomes expected. Slowly, without realizing it, they begin taking from the empath without giving anything meaningful in return. At first, the empath doesn't complain. In fact, they often make excuses for the people they love. They're going through a hard time. They don't mean it. They're stressed. They'll appreciate it someday. And because they can understand almost everyone's perspective, they become experts at justifying behavior that is hurting them. They see the wounds behind people's actions. They see the pain behind the mistakes. They see the fear behind the selfishness. This ability to understand others is beautiful, but it can also become dangerous when it causes them to ignore their own needs. So they continue giving more time, more energy, more understanding, more chances. And with every act of generosity, they hope the relationship will become more balanced. They hope the effort they invest will eventually be matched. They hope that one day someone will look at them and recognize everything they've quietly carried. But that recognition often never comes. Instead, something else happens. People become comfortable. Too comfortable. Comfortable receiving support without reciprocating it. comfortable sharing their problems without ever listening to someone else's, comfortable expecting loyalty without offering the same commitment, comfortable assuming that no matter what happens, the empath will stay. And that assumption is where the damage begins. Because while an empath may be patient, they are also observant. They notice when their messages only matter when someone needs something. They notice when their kindness is acknowledged less and expected more. They notice when they are always the one making the effort. They notice when people come to them for comfort, but disappear when it's time to offer support in return. They notice everything. The difference is that they don't always speak about it. Instead, they carry those observations quietly. One disappointment may not affect them. Neither will 2 or 10. But disappointments accumulate. Small moments become patterns. Patterns become truths. And eventually, a realization begins forming inside them. A painful realization. They begin asking themselves a question they have avoided for a very long time. What would happen if I stopped giving so much? The answer often shocks them. Because they discover that some relationships survive only because they are constantly feeding them with their own energy. The calls stop. The messages slow down. The effort disappears, not because the other person suddenly changed, but because the empath stopped carrying the entire relationship alone. This is one of the hardest lessons an empath ever learns. They realize that not everyone loves them the way they love others. Not everyone values what they bring. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to their compassion. And once this understanding takes root, something begins to shift inside them. Not dramatically, not overnight. Quietly. Very quietly, they start pulling their energy back. They stop volunteering to solve every problem. They stop chasing conversations. They stop forcing connections. They stop trying to convince people to care. And perhaps for the first time in a very long time, they begin paying attention to themselves. This surprises people. The same people who barely notice the empath's efforts suddenly notice their absence. The same people who took their kindness for granted begin wondering why things feel different. But by then, the empath has already changed because they have reached a point where exhaustion has become impossible to ignore. Imagine pouring water from a cup every single day while nobody ever refills it. At first, it seems manageable. You keep pouring because that's what you've always done. But eventually, the cup becomes empty. No matter how generous you are, you cannot give what you no longer have. Empaths eventually understand this truth. They learn that self-sacrifice is not the same as love. They learn that constantly abandoning themselves to make others comfortable is not compassion. And they learn that protecting their peace is not selfish. The saddest part is that when an empath finally decides to leave, most people think it happens suddenly. They say things like, I don't understand. Everything seemed fine. This came out of nowhere. But it never comes out of nowhere. The departure started months earlier, sometimes years earlier. It started in every moment they felt unseen. Every moment they felt unappreciated. Every moment they gave more than they received. Every moment their efforts were treated as an expectation instead of a blessing. By the time they physically walk away, they have already spent countless nights wrestling with the decision. They have already tried to fix the situation in ways nobody noticed. They have already given opportunities for change. They have already hoped things would improve. And when they finally choose distance, it is rarely motivated by anger. It is motivated by clarity. The clarity that comes from realizing their kindness deserves respect. The clarity that comes from understanding their energy is valuable. The clarity that comes from recognizing they cannot continue pouring themselves into people who only appreciate them when they are giving something away. That is why the most dangerous thing you can do to an empath is take their kindness for granted. Because they will endure more than most people can imagine. They will forgive more than most people deserve. They will stay longer than most people would. But once they truly understand that their presence is being used rather than valued. They don't create drama. They don't seek revenge. They don't demand attention. They simply become less available, less invested, less attached. And one day, the person who was always there is simply gone. Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally started caring about themselves. One of the deepest wounds you can inflict on a highly empathetic person is not betrayal, rejection, or even criticism. It's something far more subtle. It's making them feel as though their emotions don't matter. It's repeatedly sending the message, whether through words, actions, or silence, that what they feel is too much, too inconvenient, too dramatic, or simply not important enough to be acknowledged. At first, an empath doesn't react the way most people would. They don't immediately become angry. They don't usually demand attention. They don't create conflict just to be heard. Instead, they try to understand. They assume there must be a misunderstanding. They give people the benefit of the doubt. They tell themselves that maybe the other person is stressed, distracted, overwhelmed, or dealing with struggles they cannot see. Because empaths naturally look beneath the surface, they often search for explanations instead of assigning blame. This is why emotional neglect can continue for a very long time without anyone noticing the damage being done. An empath may tell someone how they feel only to hear their concerns dismissed. They may express hurt and be told they're overreacting. They may try to explain why something affected them only to be met with defensiveness instead of understanding. Over time, they begin to realize that every attempt at honesty seems to lead nowhere. The problem isn't disagreement. Healthy people can disagree. The problem is invalidation. There is a massive difference between saying, "I see why you feel that way, even though I see it differently," and saying, "You shouldn't feel that way at all." One response creates connection. The other creates distance. And distance grows faster than most people realize. An empath pays close attention to emotional signals. They notice changes in tone. They notice when conversations become one-sided. They notice when their vulnerability is ignored. They notice when their feelings are treated like obstacles instead of experiences worthy of understanding. These moments may seem small to someone else, but to an empath, they reveal something important about the relationship. Every interaction begins answering a silent question. Am I emotionally safe here? When the answer repeatedly becomes no, something starts changing beneath the surface, not all at once, not dramatically, quietly. The empath begins with holding pieces of themselves. They share less, they explain less, they open up less, not because they have stopped feeling, because they have stopped believing those feelings will be respected. Many people mistake this withdrawal for emotional stability. They think the empath has become stronger because they complain less. They think things have improved because difficult conversations have become rare. They assume the silence means peace. But silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes silence is surrender. Sometimes silence is the moment someone stops believing they will ever be understood. The tragedy is that empaths often spend years trying to communicate before they ever consider walking away. They drop hints. They start conversations. They express concerns. They explain themselves in different ways, hoping something will finally click. They aren't asking for perfection. They aren't demanding constant agreement. They simply want their emotional reality to be acknowledged. They want someone to say, "I hear you." They want someone to care enough to listen. They want someone to recognize that feelings don't need to be fixed in order to be respected. Yet many people fail this test because they become so focused on defending themselves that they stop listening altogether. The moment a person hears criticism, they rush to explain. The moment they hear disappointment, they rush to justify. The moment they hear pain, they rush to minimize it. And in doing so, they completely miss what the empath is actually asking for. The empath isn't looking for a debate. They're looking for connection. They're looking for evidence that their inner world matters. Imagine carrying a heavy weight every day and finally gathering the courage to tell someone about it. Imagine revealing something vulnerable, something deeply personal, only to have it brushed aside. Maybe it happens once, you recover. Maybe it happens twice, you forgive. Maybe it happens dozens of times over months or years. Eventually, a pattern emerges. You begin realizing that your emotions are welcome only when they are convenient. Your happiness is celebrated. Your support is appreciated. Your encouragement is valued, but your pain, your fears, your struggles, those become things people would rather avoid. And that realization changes everything. Because an empath can handle pain. What they struggle to handle is feeling invisible. They can endure hardship. What wears them down is feeling unheard. They can survive disappointment. What breaks their trust is realizing their emotional experience carries no weight in the eyes of someone they care about. Over time, emotional invalidation creates a strange kind of loneliness. It is possible to be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. It is possible to be in a relationship, a friendship, or a family and feel unseen. The empath begins recognizing this loneliness. They begin noticing that despite all the conversations, despite all the time spent together, they are carrying their deepest feelings by themselves. That awareness becomes impossible to ignore. Something inside them starts protecting itself. They become more guarded, not colder, not crueler, just more careful. They stop revealing their deepest thoughts. They stop exposing their most vulnerable emotions. They stop expecting understanding from people who have repeatedly shown they are unwilling to provide it. And here's what many people fail to understand. This isn't punishment. It isn't manipulation. It's self-preservation. Every person has a limit. Even the most compassionate. Even the most patient. Even the person who has spent years giving others grace and understanding. There comes a point when protecting your emotional well-being becomes more important than maintaining a connection that continually drains it. The empath eventually reaches that point. When they do, their behavior changes in ways that are easy to miss. The long conversations become shorter. The emotional investment becomes smaller. The excitement fades. The effort becomes minimal. They no longer fight to be understood because they've accepted that understanding isn't coming. And acceptance is powerful, far more powerful than anger. Anger still contains hope. Anger still contains investment. Anger still believes change is possible. Acceptance is different. Acceptance is the moment someone stops expecting what they have never consistently received. By the time an empath reaches this stage, the relationship is often hanging by a thread. The other person may not even realize it. They may believe everything is normal because there are fewer complaints and fewer difficult conversations. What they don't realize is that the empath has simply stopped bringing their heart to a place where it isn't valued. The emotional doors that were once wide open have quietly closed, not slammed shut, not locked with resentment, just gently closed after too many unanswered knocks. And once that happens, the distance becomes difficult to reverse because the empath is no longer leaving due to a single incident. They're leaving because of a pattern of feeling unheard, a pattern of feeling dismissed, a pattern of realizing that their emotions matter deeply to them but seem insignificant to the people around them. Eventually, they make a decision, not a loud decision, not a dramatic decision, a quiet one, the kind of decision that forms slowly after countless moments of disappointment, the kind that grows stronger every time they silence themselves because speaking feels pointless. And when that decision is finally made, they begin stepping away, not because they no longer care, not because their feelings disappeared, but because they finally understood something that changed everything. If a person repeatedly ignores your emotional reality, no amount of explaining will force them to value it. And once an empath truly accepts that truth, they stop chasing understanding from those determined not to offer it, and they begin saving their energy for places where their heart can be seen, heard, and respected. Trust is one of the most misunderstood things in human relationships. Most people think trust is built through grand promises, dramatic declarations, or powerful words spoken at the right moment. But trust is rarely built that way. Trust is built quietly. It grows through consistency. It grows through honesty. It grows through the small moments when someone proves that their actions and their words belong to the same person. And for an empath, trust is not just important, it is everything. An empath experiences relationships differently than most people. They don't simply hear what people say. They pay attention to what people do. They notice the hesitation behind the promise. They notice the shift in energy behind the smile. They notice the difference between someone's public face and private behavior. While others may focus on appearances, empaths often focus on patterns. They are constantly observing, constantly feeling, constantly gathering information that most people overlook. This is why betrayal affects them so deeply. When an empath trusts someone, they are not offering a casual gift. They are offering access to their inner world. They are allowing someone to see parts of them that few people ever get to see. Their fears, their dreams, their insecurities, their hopes, their wounds. The things they rarely show to anyone else. And because they understand how vulnerable that process is, they do not take trust lightly. Yet one of the greatest misconceptions about empaths is that because they are compassionate, they are easy to fool. Nothing could be further from the truth. Empaths often see warning signs long before they admit them to themselves. They notice inconsistencies. They notice when stories don't match. They notice when promises repeatedly go unfulfilled. They notice when someone's words create one reality while their actions create another. The difference is that they often give people opportunities to change before they make final judgments. That is where many people become confused. They assume forgiveness means ignorance. They assume patience means blindness. They assume understanding means weakness. But forgiveness does not mean an empath failed to notice what happened. It usually means they noticed everything and chose compassion anyway. An empath may forgive a lie. They may forgive a mistake. They may forgive behavior that would cause someone else to walk away immediately. Not because they enjoy being hurt, not because they lack self-respect, but because they understand that human beings are imperfect. They understand fear. They understand insecurity. They understand that people sometimes make poor choices when they are struggling. Because they can see the humanity behind mistakes, they often give people chances that others would never give. The problem begins when those chances become patterns. A single broken promise can be repaired. Repeated broken promises create a different story. One moment of dishonesty may be a mistake. A habit of dishonesty becomes a character trait. And empaths are exceptionally skilled at recognizing patterns. At first they hope the person will change. They hope the situation will improve. They hope the trust can be rebuilt. Because despite what many people believe, empaths do not enjoy giving up on people. In fact, walking away is often one of the hardest decisions they ever make. They invest deeply. They care deeply. They believe deeply. When they love someone, they genuinely want that relationship to succeed. That is why they stay longer than most people would. They keep searching for reasons to believe. They keep finding explanations. They keep extending grace. And every time they do, they silently absorb another wound. The person who keeps betraying them often mistakes this endurance for unlimited tolerance. They begin believing there will always be another chance, another apology, another excuse, another opportunity to make things right later. But what they fail to understand is that every betrayal leaves a mark. Not always a visible mark, not always an immediate mark, but a mark nonetheless. Trust does not usually collapse all at once. It erodes slowly, quietly, one disappointment at a time, one broken promise at a time, one moment of dishonesty at a time. Imagine placing a crack in a piece of glass. The glass may still hold together. From a distance, it may even appear unchanged, but the structure has weakened. Add another crack, then another, then another. Eventually, the damage reaches a point where the entire surface becomes fragile. Trust works the same way. People often focus on the final moment when the relationship breaks apart. The empath focuses on the hundreds of moments that led there. That is why their departure often surprises everyone except themselves. While others are looking at the final event, the empath is looking at the entire history. They remember every promise that was broken, every truth that was hidden, every boundary that was ignored, every opportunity that was wasted, and perhaps most importantly, every chance they gave that was not respected. The remarkable thing about empaths is that they rarely make dramatic exits. They rarely announce every thought they are having. While others may threaten to leave repeatedly, empaths often become quieter as they approach their limit. This silence is dangerous because it is frequently misunderstood. People assume the issue has passed. They assume forgiveness has erased the damage. They assume everything has returned to normal. What they don't realize is that the empath is observing, watching, reflecting, evaluating whether the relationship still deserves a place in their life. Because eventually, a moment arrives when something inside them changes. Not in anger, not in bitterness. In clarity, clarity is different from emotion. Emotion can fluctuate. Clarity remains. Clarity allows an empath to finally see a situation exactly as it is instead of how they wish it could be. They stop focusing on potential. They stop focusing on promises. They stop focusing on who someone could become. And they start focusing on who that person has consistently shown themselves to be. That realization can be heartbreaking, especially for someone who has spent years believing in another person's capacity for growth. But it is also liberating, because the empath finally understands something powerful. Trust is not rebuilt through words. Trust is rebuilt through behavior. And when behavior refuses to change, trust cannot survive. The moment this truth fully settles into their mind, the relationship begins to transform. The emotional attachment weakens. The constant worrying stops. The endless efforts to repair things begin fading away. The empath no longer feels responsible for saving something that another person keeps damaging. And this is often the moment people notice something feels different. The empath becomes calmer, more distant, less reactive, less invested. The emotional intensity that once fueled the relationship starts disappearing. Not because they stopped caring overnight, because they stopped believing. And once belief disappears, everything changes. The person who repeatedly violated trust may try to fix things at the last moment. They may offer explanations. They may make promises. They may express regret. But by this stage, the empath is no longer listening primarily to words. They are listening to history. They are listening to patterns. They are listening to the accumulated evidence of countless experiences. Because trust is not destroyed by one betrayal alone. It is destroyed when betrayal becomes predictable, when disappointment becomes familiar, when honesty becomes uncertain, when respect becomes optional, and when an empath finally accepts that reality, they make one of the quietest and most powerful decisions of their life. They stop trying to convince someone to become trustworthy. They stop hoping that repeated behavior will magically change. They stop sacrificing their peace for the possibility of a different future. And instead they choose themselves, not out of revenge, not out of hatred, not even out of anger, but out of the understanding that a heart cannot continue thriving in a place where trust has been broken so many times that it no longer feels safe to remain. So if there's one thing to remember from all of this, it's that an empath rarely leaves because of one mistake. They leave because of a pattern of being taken for granted, a pattern of having their feelings ignored, a pattern of watching trust slowly disappear, one disappointment at a time. Most people think an empath's greatest strength is their ability to love. But their greatest strength is actually their ability to keep loving after they've been hurt. And that is exactly why losing them is so costly. Because when an empath truly cares about you, they don't just offer their presence, they offer their patience, their understanding, their loyalty, their emotional support, their energy, pieces of themselves that can never be replaced. The tragedy is that many people only recognize that value after it's gone. They assume the empath will always be there, always forgive, always understand, always stay, until one day they don't. And when an empath finally reaches their limit, they don't usually leave with a dramatic goodbye. They don't always explain every reason. They don't always fight for the last word. They simply stop standing in places where their heart is no longer respected. They choose peace over chaos, self-respect over self-sacrifice, healing over hoping, and that's why their departure feels so final. Because by the time they walk away physically, they've already spent months, sometimes years, letting go emotionally. So if you have someone in your life who listens when nobody else will, who understands without judgment, who supports you through your worst moments, who continues showing kindness in a world that often rewards selfishness, don't assume they'll always be there. Appreciate them while they are. Respect their feelings while they still share them. Protect their trust while you still have it. Because the strongest hearts aren't the ones that never break. They're the ones that continue loving despite being broken. And once a heart like that decides to leave, it rarely leaves out of anger. It leaves out of wisdom. Before you go, ask yourself one question. Have you ever lost someone who genuinely cared about you? Not because they stopped loving you, but because they got tired of being the only one protecting the relationship. Think about that, because the answer might reveal more about your relationships than you realize. And if this message resonated with you, remember this: the people who care the deepest often suffer the quietest. Don't wait until their silence becomes their goodbye.